Just down the road, about an hour from Savannah, lies the unincorporated town of Harris Neck in McIntosh County. It's home to the smallest church in America and a national wildlife refuge. But there is a little-known history about this hamlet, once a thriving community. The land, deeded to a former slave in 1865 by a plantation owner, Wilson Moran, is a direct descendant of Harris Neck.
If these trees could talk, I wouldn't have to tell my story.
Many of his ancestors, including his mother and grandmother, are buried here in Gould Cemetery, one of the only remaining sites of what once was. After the Civil War, black families settled in the area and thrived. This sketch depicts what his grandmother's house looked like.
They lived a great life. They had a great plan, one success after another.
For more than 80 years, it was home to a prosperous, autonomous, close-knit town of more than 75 African-American families.
We had our own school. We had our own fire department. We had our own judge, Judge Lowe, Winston Rutherford, another cousin of mine, his great-grandfather. We had two churches. Business-wise, we were expert at fishing, shrimp, crabs, oyster, plus my grandfather, they were farmers.
But in the summer of 1942, everything changed. During World War II, the federal government, by means of eminent domain, forcibly seized Harris Neck, more than 2,600 acres, to build an Army airfield.
How I was told by my grandparents was that in 1942, the war was going on, the World War II, and the German U-boats were blowing up the merchant ships coming out of Jacksonville, coming out of Brunswick, Savannah, and Charleston. And the military needed a place in which they could combat these U-boats with their planes. The local power structure, having a problem with us because we were too successful, led them to Harris Neck, even though there were a lot of land that was uninhabited all around us.
Moran says residents were given just 2 weeks to move. Crops, houses, buildings, and businesses destroyed, leaving them to fend for themselves.
I should note that some of the people of the 70-some families couldn't move fast enough, so their homes were either bulldozed or burned down. They had to get out, but they had no place to go either. This is my grandmother, Amelia Dolly, who I was born in her house and never left.
Many of them, like Moran's family, relocated to a nearby area under the false promise that the property would be returned to them after the war.
We moved out here, right next door. They had to do a lean-to shack because my mom was very pregnant with me. So that means in this little lean-to shack was my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, my father, my uncle, Pastor Robert Thorpe, my brother Rayfield, my other brother Roosevelt, and my sister Amelia, and then I came. They were separated from what I understand by blankets, but they cooked on the outside. That was a difficult time for them.
Their land was never given back. Instead, the then War Department gave Harris Neck to McIntosh County.
In 1945 or whatever, black people had no say in the government, so we didn't even know they returned the land back to the county. Then the county officials then took the land, and with the promise that they were going to make a airport out of it, but that's not what they did. Oh wow. On the runways, whether it's they made a racing track, on one of the houses they made it a house of prostitution. And one of the county commissioners placed his cows on the land, because 2,687 acres of land, for $1 a year.
In 1961, the federal government took it back and gave it to the Department of Interior, From 1962 to the present, the land has been a national wildlife refuge. It's now been 81 years, leaving Moran to wonder if that promise will ever come to pass.
It's a difficult thing to deal with, but it is what it is. Only thought I can think of why they haven't given us the land back is racism.
I'm not going to name names, but we've worked with many members of Congress and the Senate, and I just think it's cowardice. They don't want to tackle this.
David Kelly moved to Harris Neck from California more than 2 decades ago after hearing about their plight on NPR radio.
This story just struck me. I don't know what it was. So when I heard it, I went to my office the next day. I printed out the transcript, and I was writing a book, which was a compilation of all the some of the radio interviews, like, I interviewed the Dalai Lama and Al Gore and stuff. So I wanted to put those into a book format. I just thought it would make. And then this story came along, and I put that on the shelf and have never returned to it.
Kelly is now the executive director of the Harris Neck Land Trust, an organization formed in 2005 for the sole purpose of achieving justice they say is long overdue.
So we have a top-notch advisory board, and then the trust, I'm the only outsider, so I'm just a staff person. So the trust is made up completely of Harris Neck people. There's nobody in the trust who is not an elder, well, the elders are gone, or a descendant. And now there's, 4 generations, I think, since the elders.
Through the years, their story has garnered attention around the nation and around the world, from the London Times to the New York Times. In 1983, CBS's Mike Wallace aired a segment on 60 Minutes, and just last year it was featured in the Hulu series The 1619 Project with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones. They've been from the courts to Congress, but have still gained very little traction.
That's where it went first in 1979 and 80. It went to the courts, and a federal district judge who's still alive had a hearing in Brunswick, and they said there's no legal remedy for this. It has to be done by Congress.
The trust is seeking the title to 500 of the now more than 2,800 refuge acres. Their next plan is to petition the president.
Many refuges in the United States, including the very first one down in Florida, created by Teddy Roosevelt in 1903. Many refuges have been created, modified, and closed by executive order. Many. All we want is President Biden to sign a 1-page executive order which returns 500 acres in the very eastern segment of Harris Neck. What we're after is just simple restorative justice, and so we use the word restitution.
But no matter what you call it, Mr. Moran says he just wants someone to make it right.
Maybe someone with the power to help us to get our land back, and somebody who is strong enough to stand up and say, okay, we did them wrong, let's make a difference. Let's give them their land back.
Kim Gusby, WSAV News 3.